Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has denied certain reporters, which is to say journalists who actually report facts, access to this week's Pentagon briefings. I cannot imagine why. He's continuing the Trump regime's war on the free and fair press. According to the Associated Press, only journalists handpicked by Hegseth are allowed to attend. They add, quote, that Hegseth's team says the briefings are part of a special orientation event for a newly credentialed Pentagon press corps consisting primarily of conservative outlets that agreed to his new rules for operation, unquote. In other words, not journalists, stenographers, if you will, propagandists who understand their brief, which is to repeat what they were told and to put the spin that Hegseth and Donald and others in the Trump regime want put upon whatever misinformation, disinformation, or propaganda is coming out of such briefings. Earlier this fall, Hegseth laid out new restrictive rules for Pentagon reporting, which included reporters getting Hegseth approval for all information before publishing. Again, that's not how journalism works. Facing expulsion for publishing unapproved information, and refraining from soliciting information from military officials. Members of the media were told to sign an agreement promising to follow these restrictions or give up their press badges. So, press organizations, including outlets like Fox, refused these terms and left the Pentagon en masse. Rachel Maddow discussed the significance of this on MS Now. Take a look.
The cowardice that we have seen has been from institutions, and that includes media organizations and news organizations, where we've seen executives over and over and over again make cowardly and craven decisions to try to appease Trump or please him in some way in the hopes that maybe that earns you another day of being allowed to operate at his pleasure. It's just been disgusting what we've seen from the most important and valuable corporations in this country and law firms and universities and all the rest of it. In this case, we've got all of those Pentagon reporters with their news organizations behind them standing up and saying no. We are not stenographers. We are not going to work under strictures where we are only allowed to write down what you tell us we can write down. That's not journalism, and we're not going to do it under those terms. We'll do it some other way. We'll give up these bureaus, these physical bureaus inside the Pentagon, sure, and that is a compromise, absolutely. We will find other ways to do this work, because you keeping us here while we only write what you want and approve us of saying would have us working here as your lackeys rather than working as journalists, and we're journalists.
Thankfully, individual journalists have the courage to take such a stance, unlike their corporate overlords, which, as Maddow pointed out, continue to capitulate, thereby normalizing and empowering a fascist regime, which is the enemy of the free press. By the way, Hegseth's curated new press corps includes Donald's ally, the Islamophobic conspiracy theorist and vile human being Laura Loomer, and alleged sex trafficker, former Representative Matt Gaetz. So if you think those two people are going to provide you with factual information, especially if said information makes the Trump regime look bad, well, you would be sadly mistaken. The Washington Post, the AP, CNN, Reuters, and Newsmax all requested special access for this week's Pentagon briefings and were denied. They're still focused, however, on covering military operations, including new calls to investigate Hegseth over a possible war crime, which, as I alluded to earlier, is very likely the reason for Hegseth surrounding him with a bunch of hacks. Back on September 2nd, the Trump regime launched a strike on a suspected drug trafficking boat in the Caribbean, which in and of itself is in contravention of international law and the rules of war. After the initial attack, 2 survivors clung to the ship's wreckage. A second attack was launched, killing both of these men, which is a war crime. Last week, the Washington Post dropped a bombshell reporting that Hegseth had given a spoken directive to kill everybody on the boat. Given this command, the second strike was launched. According to CBS News, quote, a Pentagon manual on the law of war says combatants that are wounded, sick, or shipwrecked no longer pose a threat and should not be attacked, unquote. Hence the war crime. Killing anybody who has surrendered, who is incapable of defending themselves or who is obviously no longer a threat are not to be murdered in cold blood, which is something that the United States government and the military, as led by the so-called Commander-in-Chief and Secretary of Defense, is becoming increasingly adept at. Recent U.S. strikes on vessels suspected of drug smuggling have killed more than 80 people. Lethal military attacks are only justified under the law when the target poses an imminent threat, which has not been the case in any of these bombings. Many experts say that these attacks are illegal and constitute murder. Many experts would be correct. Now, with new revelations on Hegseth orders, House and Senate investigations are underway. These are bipartisan efforts, by the way. So apparently, even some Republicans have a line. Lawmakers from both parties have renewed support from these acts of oversight. So, again, it is very clear why Pete Hegseth doesn't want actual journalists anywhere near his briefings or the Pentagon. But before we go on, the Trump regime wants to silence anyone who exposes the truth about them, something we will never shy away from doing. So please like and share this video, and if you believe in our mission, please subscribe to the Barry Trump Media channel. The Trump regime escalated its attacks on the media even further this week when they launched a Media Offender of the Week page on the White House official website. This criticizes outlets and individuals that the Trump regime doesn't like, which is to say, that report accurately on Donald and the Trump regime. This week's so-called offenders included CBS News, The Independent, and the Boston Globe for reporting on Donald's issuing illegal orders to service members. France 24 offered an international perspective on Donald's war with the media. Watch this.
Media watchdog Reporters Without Borders says the U.S. president has a clear strategy to weaken the press, similar to ones used in other countries. This includes the defunding of public media, smearing journalists, and taking measures against reporters who use words he does not approve of. U.S. news agency AP has been banned from White House briefings since they refused to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico.
But I just say that we're going to keep them out until such time as they agree that it's the Gulf of America. We're very proud of this country, and we want it to be the Gulf of America.
RSF sees similarities between this approach and the one adopted by Russia, where journalists have been banned from using the word war when referring to the situation in Ukraine.
This is what happens when you put a thin-skinned bully in charge of things. Just because Donald says that the Gulf of Mexico is now the Gulf of America does not make it so. And anybody who continues to call the Gulf of Mexico should not be punished. Because to call it the Gulf of America and believe that that's now what it's called would be delusional. Anyway, American journalism is in dire straits, partially, of course, because of the attacks, the relentless and ongoing attacks levied at it by Donald Trump, but also because of the media corporations that continue to leave their reporters and journalists out in the cold. We have to do better. And we have to do better for them because there is no democracy without a strong and thriving fourth estate. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.